Hi everyone, I'm Noelle and this is another video on the channel, Reading with Macaire. I've been looking forward to making this video because it's actually my first wrap-up. And it's going to be the wrap-up for the first half of May. Now, technically, I'm filming this on the 14th, so it's not really the first half of May, but the two books that I'm reading now, Anna Karenina and De Avonden by Gerard Reven, I won't have finished by tomorrow, so I could do this! Excited. Now, I am one of those people that now in Corona has a lot of time to read and does not have difficulties with reading, which I am very grateful for. But it means that now in the first half of May, I've already read 10 books, which is a lot. So let's get cracking. Okay, confession time. I started filming this video. It turns out I can't just freestyle just having written down what books I read and the main characters. I need to think about what I'm going to say first. So I just did that. Took me 1 hour, and now I can actually continue filming. The first book I read in May is The Influential Mind, What the Brain Reveals About Our Power to Change Others by Tali Sharot. Tali Sharot is a neuroscientist who wrote this non-fiction book about how to convince others. The book talks about how we are actually hardly led by facts when we are trying to form an opinion about a subject, but that we are led a lot more by our emotions. It talks about how when we already have a certain opinion on a subject and we hear facts about the contrary opinion, our brain finds reasons those facts aren't true, and those facts actually reinforces our original opinion. And it talks about how to make ourselves do things and how to make ourselves not do other things. Overall, I found this book really interesting. It's the first book I read about this kind of behavioral neuro stuff, and as it gives a lot of examples of research that is done, it's really an accessible read. And I took notes throughout that I hope I will remember, or at least remember to look at one point or another. The things that I found hard to realize is how we are driven by our emotions and by our surroundings a lot more than I hoped. I mean, we hope that we are rational beings and that we use our frontal lobes, but apparently we don't do that as much as we think. So that was really interesting. I would really recommend this book if you're interested in this topic of what forms our behavior and why we think the way we think. Now, I would love to hear from people that have read more of these types of books, because I can't tell whether this book cuts any corners or stuff like that, or if what it says is really true. So if you have, love to hear from you. Otherwise, recommend, because for me as a beginner, it was great. The second book I read in May was Square Haunting, 5 Women, Freedom and Life in London Between the Wars by Francesca Wade. This is also a non-fiction that I listened to on audio, and it talks about the life of 5 women who are 5 important writers, who are 5 women with brains, and their lives in London at the time. All of these women had at one point or another lived at Mecklenburgh Square. Now, the 5 women's, and for this I need my notes because I can't seem to remember them, are H.D., a modernist poet, Dorothy L. Sayers, who is a detective novelist, Jane Harrison, a classicist, Aileen Power, an economic historian, and last but not least, Virginia Woolf, the author and also publicist. The book talks about the struggles that these women have to overcome in that period. There are women that want to be educated, that are the first to be able to go to university, though in the beginning still not be able to get a degree for it. There are women that have brains and want to write and have stuff to say, but they get resistance. And the book talks about the consequences of trying to lead the lives that they want to lead. So, for example, for all of them, it means that they have a very definite idea of what they're looking for in a relationship, because that relationship can't mean that they're not able to write, or can't mean that they're not able to do their jobs, because their jobs is what really gives them a feeling of self-worth. So for some, that means that they end up not having a relationship at all, because they put themselves at number 1. And I thought that was very interesting. Now, the book also talks about what it means to live during the First World War, during the interbellum, and during the Second World War, and the influence that has on their lives, which was also interesting, but I would have liked to hear about that a little bit more. Now, I did not know these women when I started this book, except for Virginia Woolf. And I think that influenced my reading experience. And also with Virginia Woolf, which I did know, I only have read one of her works, which is Orlando, and wasn't my cup of tea. Francesca Wade, the author, does talk about what they write at the certain periods in their lives, and I think if you knew the works, that would have made this book a lot more interesting. But I am now looking forward to read another book of Virginia Woolf, which is A Room of One's Own. So I would recommend you reading this book if you like to read about the life of authors, if you like to read about this period, if you like to read about women just trying to lead the lives that they want to read. Francesca Wade has done a tremendous amount of research, and that really shows throughout the book. Sorry, by the way, if I'm moving around. It turns out sitting on the floor is not as comfortable for a long period of time. Anyhow, the third book I read this month is another nonfiction. Now, I don't want you all to have the impression I'm a huge nonfiction reader. My goal for this year was to read 6 nonfiction, and I'm now at 7. So this was just a really special beginning of the month, apparently. But the third book I read was The Politics of Down Syndrome, written by Kieron Smith. This is a short nonfiction book about how institutions deal with people that have Down syndrome, for example, when it comes to prenatal testing and the consequences of that, when it comes to education, and how we as a society think of people with Down syndrome in general. Now, Kieron Smith wrote this book because he himself now has a young daughter, 5 years old, who has Down, and it really made him think about the prejudices that we have against people that happen to have an extra chromosome. For example, he talks about how when a prenatal test shows a child has Down syndrome, nearly automatically the question is, when shall I plan the abortion? And that the parents are given information about what it means to have a child with Down syndrome, but that information is very biased and negatively biased. The writer does not at all say that all life is precious and that you need to have whatever child you are given, but he wants us to look at the information that is then given and to update that information with the research that has been done in the past couple of years. And he also says approximately the same for schools, that we should give teachers better information on how to deal with children that have Down syndrome, that the schools are aware that these children have special needs, that the children are, for example, given speech therapists, but that the speech therapist then is not aware of how to best teach a child with Down syndrome, stuff like that. And I thought that was very interesting. Now, of course, I have no experience whatsoever in these areas, so I don't know how the schooling system actually deals with it now, because this book was written in 2011, and how different countries deal with it. But I thought it was very insightful to learn about, yet again, how strong our prejudices are, and this book really encourages us to do our research, basically, and not assume that what we think we know is the truth, which I find really interesting, and I would recommend reading this book if, like me, you have no idea whatsoever about what it means to have Down syndrome. I will say, however, that at no point does the author say what the consequences are of having Down syndrome. I mean, for the child, it does say what the physical consequences are, but he could have said more about that. But maybe if his point is we should educate ourselves, not giving us the information could be a way of getting us to go educate ourselves. So if that's the case, smart. The next book I read was C'est moi qui éteins les lumieres by Zoya Pirzad, which was translated from Persian by Christophe Balay. Let me check that. Yes, that was correct! Now, in this book, we follow Clarisse, who is an Armenian stay-at-home mother of 3, and who lives in an Armenian neighborhood, but in Abadan, which is in Iran. And it talks about what her life looks like, how she deals with her very noisy mother and her very dramatic sister, and about what happens when they get new neighbors, and she starts to have a real link with her neighbor and what the consequences of that are. Now, this book was not what I expected at all. I really wanted to learn about what it meant to be Armenian, more about the culture, and what it meant to be as an Armenian in Iran, which is usually what I'm really interested in, and this book did not do that at all. We did get some food described to us, and at one point there is some kind of commemoration ceremony, and I think it's for the Armenian genocide, but even that, it was so small and so nonchalant that it's a genocide. I wasn't grasped here, and that's what I expect when people talk about a genocide, so I'm even hesitant whether it was about that. So disappointed about that. The book just describes her life as a housewife and how she's not really happy but doesn't really do anything about that. And you're curious about what will happen between her and the neighbor, but even that was not enough in the end for me to like it. It was not my jam at all. I think if you like books that are about home life and that don't have a strong plot and etc., then you might like this, but otherwise I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I do, however, really like the cover. Wish I had more of books from this edition, because I think they would be super nice stacked together in my bookcase. However, I don't think I'm going to keep this. The next book I read is One by Sarah Crossan. It's written in free verse, which is something I don't usually read but really worked. And the book is written from the standpoint of Grace, who is part of a conjoined twins. And her sister Tipi are joined at the hips, and we learn about what that means for them, basically, and how the medical bills mean that their family is really poor. And the book starts with them having to go to school because their mother needs a job and can't stay at home to teach them, and how they have to deal more with people looking at them. Now, what I loved most about this book is the love between the sisters. Really showed me how being in conjoined twins was their normal, and even though they did not like the stairs and they hated that people see them as one person, even though they both have different personalities, they are at the same time one and two, and they don't want to be separated, because being one and sharing their lives like they do is part of their lives, which was beautiful. I really like the free verse element. It made the book very flowy and eerie, which was really nice because it does deal with a difficult time in their lives, especially when they start to have medical problems. Now, sometimes the book did feel a bit YA, but I completely forgave it, and I really recommend you read it. I read a couple of graphic novels. This month I discovered Script, and it turns out you have a lot of content on there, including graphic novels, so it was really a good way for me to get my hand on some of those. I started by reading Lumberjanes, which is created by Noelle Stevenson, Grace Ellis, Shannon Waters, and Brooke A. Allen. Now, this graphic novel deals with 5 friends who go to camp in the forest and the adventures that they have. I mean, already on the second page, they're fighting 3-eyed foxes, I believe, and they're gods and goddesses, and the book is a lot about their friendship, and there's a lot of energy and positivity about it, which was fun to read. I only read the first one, and I don't think I'm going to continue with the series, but I can't really put my finger on why. So check it out, short read, fun. And I love the fact that it's called Lumberjanes, which is a reaction to Lumberjack. Love. Next, I read another graphic novel, which is The Avant-Guard, written by Carly Usdain and Noah Hayes. This graphic novel does not have weird animals with 3 eyes, but deals with a group of friends that have a basketball team and are having matches in a non-binary league. And we have queer characters and characters that are bi and characters that are non-binary, and it deals with that in a very... It doesn't make an issue of it, which is awesome. The graphic novels talk about their friendship, and it is very sweet and cute, and we've got lots of budding little romances everywhere. And you can tell because I read in 2 days Avant-Garde 1, Avant-Garde 2, Avant-Garde 3, Avant-Garde 4, Avant-Garde 5, Avant-Garde 6, Avant-Garde 7, and Avant-Garde 8. And those were all that were out, so I had to stop there. But they're very, very short, so I counted them all as one book. And I would recommend you give it a go because it's very sweet and cute and heartwarming. What I read is the total opposite. It is not sweet and cute and heartwarming. It is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Now, I think most of us know what this book is about. It's about a group of young boys that get stranded on the island, and at the beginning they're British and we're not savages and we'll be rescued and it'll all be fine, and very quickly their little society starts crumbling down. Now, I don't know why I read a book about savagery versus society and how society loses in these times. I really don't know what took me. It hit close to home when I thought about the hoarding and the stuff that we did right at the beginning of the pandemic and things that are probably happening still in other parts of the world. But it also made me happy to realize that after a few days our frontal cortexes took over and we were able to be a society again, at least until now, so I'm curious how that will go. This book was very interesting. I like how the build-up is slow, it's very realistic, the characters are really representative of, I think, different types of people in society, which was really nice. The only thing I really missed in this was girls. All of these are white boys, and I understand for that time, but I really would have been interested to see what the influences having a few girls in this group would have meant. Not saying that we would have saved it and society would have survived, not at all, but I'd be interested to see if it would have meant that the differences that there are between the hunters and the gatherers is stronger, whether a different care would have been taken of the smaller children, whether there would have been a trophy wives kind of society going on, and etc., etc. I would have found that very interesting, and I missed that a bit. However, I really liked it. I recommend you read it, though maybe not in this time if this gives you a bit of anxiety, because it's not a positive book. Next, I read The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives by Titi Lola Shoneim, and I read the version adapted for theatre, which was done by Rotimi Babatunde. And now in this book, we hear about Baba Segi and his 4 wives, and they live in Nigeria. The 4th wife, Bolanle, is not being accepted by the first 3. Her and Baba Segi can't seem to have children, so he makes her go to the hospital. The consequences that has on the whole family, and we also hear about how these wives become Baba Segi's wives and the power that he has on them, and how he is really the center of what they do. Now the plot is a bit predictable, but it's compensated by the characters being very strong. Like I said, I read the theater version, and normally when I read a book, I don't really see stuff happening and movement. And now, because it was so clear and easy and we would read how people would stand on stage, it really made it very strong. I could really feel the atmosphere that there would have been on stage, and that was really great. And I would actually love to hear about anybody who's read the book, so not the version for theater, because I would love to be able to compare the two and how the characters came across in the book and how the evolution of the plot went. Most interesting thing in the book, besides the strong characters, is how it talks about polygamy and about how these wives have to do to keep their husband happy and to keep him from putting them on the streets. So for that, I recommend you giving it a go. The book that I read in the first half of May was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. In this book, we meet Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy, and we hear about their lives and their relationships with one another. Now, I feel most people know what this book is about, but I'm going to try to keep it spoiler-free because that improves your reading experience. Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy have been put on Earth with a very specific purpose in mind, and the book not only talks about what it means to be human and this purpose, but mostly what it does very well is that we're not given all the information. We're given information in a way that we kind of know what's going on, but at the same time we don't. And it's the same thing that happens to the characters. When they are children, they are told what their purpose will be, but they are told when they're young, and they're given information that they don't really understand. So they know, they're aware, but they have no idea. And the same thing happens to us as readers, which is great. Now, the best thing about his book really is Kazuo Ishiguro's writing. He writes so naturally. This book is written from the standpoint of Kathy, and she talks to you, and she says things like, oh wait, I should maybe tell you about this and that, and it's as if you're listening to a person talking, and it's really nice. And I'm looking forward to reading more of his work, and I really recommend this book, though I prefer The Remains of the Day, but that's maybe has more to do with that I like that world more, the Downton Abbey-esque world. So, read this. The books I wanted to talk to you about today. Thanks for listening, thanks for sticking around. I'm curious to hear if any of you have maybe not written these books. I imagine you're not necessarily the authors, but at least if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. So talk to me in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.